The Rebel Capitalist Show. Makes me, I guess, remember the importance of civil disobedience, or the power. Maybe that's a better way to say it. It reminds me of the power of civil disobedience. And I know like gun rights are extremely important, but I've heard a lot of people say the only difference between us and Australia with their quarantine camps is the fact that we have a lot of guns. I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I'm an advocate for the Second Amendment. I think that everyone should own and understand how to use a firearm. But I just think about Phoenix in 2020 when they went to the lockdowns. And number one, people didn't, stand up with. And I'm not saying anyone should be violent, but no one stood up with their guns. And if you would have had, let's say, 1,000 or 2,000 people in Phoenix stand up and go out to the streets with their shotguns or whatever it is, I mean, they would have been completely wiped out by the police, the government, the military, XYZ. But if you would add all 4 million people that live in Phoenix with no guns, just go out to the street and continue to walk their dog, continue to open their business, continue to go to the gym, and just say, no, we're not doing your lockdown thing. There's nothing the government could have done in that situation. And another example of that, I just tweeted this out the other day, it's a story that you might find fascinating. We did our last mastermind group, the collective, which you were a part of the very first one, but we did our second one just the other day in Naples, Florida. So all the members had to fly into Fort Myers. And as you know, Naples, Florida is you want to talk about people who are independent and like their freedom. That would be Naples, Florida. So my research assistant, Josh, who he had a connecting flight in Charlotte. So his flight from Charlotte to Fort Myers, he said that once they got up in the air, kind of moving, about 70% of the people on the plane took off their mask. 70%. And, the flight attendants kind of panic and what do we do? What do we do? And they went to the front and they asked, on the loudspeaker for everyone to put their masks on. And they just politely said, no, we're not, no. And they're like, okay. So I guess they didn't serve food or they didn't serve drinks. But they just kept flying and landed in Fort Myers. And like, okay, have a good day. But it just goes to show you the power of civil disobedience. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's often underestimated. The people forget that they hold the power. I always like to say the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing people he did not exist. Right. The greatest trick the system ever pulled is convincing people they cannot resist. And that is constantly a recurrent throughout all political history. It's the reason why the government obsesses over taxes, as an example. I remember having this conversation with a attorney general in Maine. And it was about that, my client had unique beliefs about the tax system, didn't think it was being legally imposed. He'd been reading a little Irwin Schiff and some people like that. Yeah. And the prosecutor's like, you don't understand, Mr. Barnes. We have to prosecute your client because if we even get 10% of lobstermen here in Maine to adopt your client's position, this whole system of ours collapses. And I remember telling him, well, if I go to trial and win, I'll guarantee you'll have that 10% in a year. So maybe you should, reconsider how you want to approach it. But it was very revelatory. It's why the system, we're one of the only countries in the world that criminalizes taxes in the modern world. Most countries you do civil fines, things like that. Why is the United States federal government so paranoid about taxes? Because they know how our country was founded. All it took was about 10, 20% of people saying, I'm not paying the tea tariff. I'm not paying this. I'm not paying that. I'm not paying the tobacco tax. Like Patrick Henry made himself famous, arguing for the lowest possible fine in that case, which the jury gave him. What the system knows that it only requires a few neos in the system for the system to collapse if it just gets enough popular support. So like if there's only one or two of us not wanting to do our mask on a plane, the plane will probably be willing to stop and sanction us and remove us and whatever. But if it's the most of the plane or even 20% of the plane, they're just going to give up and go to the front and say, screw it. Yeah, right. And so that's the reality across the board. If people had mass civil disobedience, mass non-compliance, it's how Martin Luther King built the civil rights movement. Just walk into a Woolworths and sit there. And it wasn't by, Rosa Parks. I'm going to sit in the front today. And what happens, you find out the system's not, it relies upon only 1 or 2% resisting. It's why they thought these mandates would work. Historically, in the school systems, only 1 to 2% of parents were saying no to the massive number of vaccines their kids were being ordered to take. I mean, went from like 3 or 4 vaccines to 8 or 9 to, in some states, there's like 60 vaccines on this kid's schedule. It's like, how exactly did we suddenly need 60 vaccines? And that's what got Bobby Kennedy involved in these issues. But but it's only been about 2-3% complaining. And that's what they thought in the employment context. They're like, okay, only 2 or 3% employees we lose, no biggie. What happens when it's 5%, 10%, 20%? System tumbles. System cannot handle it. And so, there's been a range of data studies in a wide range of contexts that 20% threshold is like a magical threshold. It's like in neighborhoods. If a neighborhood hits 20% A, B, C, or D, all of a sudden the neighborhood will flip within a year in terms of who lives in the neighborhood. A whole bunch of those examples. It's just something about that. Once you get to that threshold, the system collapses. Almost every
bank run. It's like a bank run with fractional reserve banking, isn't it?
Exactly. All you need is just enough people. You don't even need a majority. And really, it's 2 to 3% leading the rest and getting 10 to 20%. And that's where, like in Canada, Trudeau had to panic because they were getting a third of the people in Canada were suddenly like, we agree with the truckers. And then all of a sudden, overnight, several big provinces decided, you know what? We don't need those mandates anymore. Well, we can take them away.
That. I think Saskatchewan came out. I think, or is Alberta? I'm sorry.
Both of them did.
Yeah, I know. Well, Alberta is the province. Like, in Saskatchewan is a province as well, isn't it?
Yes, I can't pronunciate Sasquatch. I always get I see a Sasquatch and I can't get the name right.
No, I know it's Saskatchewan, yeah, and I know, yeah. So Calgary is in Alberta. I know I've actually been to Calgary, but Alberta is the province. Yeah, I know that the Alberta gentleman, I think just last night or the night prior, said he was going to pull back on the restrictions, and I think they did it in other places as well.
Yes, I mean, and Quebec was going to tax the unvaccinated. Right. I mean, which is just some of you can see the government's going through their wish list of power, and like, oh yeah, we'll try this, we'll try this, we'll try this. He reversed as soon as the trucker convoy took off. All of a sudden, the Quebec premier, who has loved all the lockdowns and every other restriction, keeps imposing curfews on Quebec every other week. Always 2 weeks to flatten the curve, becomes 6 months, which was, the truckers were great at this stuff. They're like, how long are you going to be here? 2 weeks to flatten the mandates. So they were playing off all the politician language over the last year that was just exposing the politicians for the fraud that they are. And it was done in such a genius way. I mean, it goes back to like guys like Abby Hoffman, who actually convinced some people in the Pentagon that they were really going to levitate the Pentagon. So he said, let's all protest. We'll say some magic language and we'll make the Pentagon lift above the ground. and the security people went nuts about it. It's like, I mean, obviously it was comedic public, gesture, but it was genius use of it politically. The truckers have employed every effective tool in that respect, while making sure it stayed civil, making sure it never turned violent, making sure nobody was a problem, cleaning up its own if anybody was trying to act out. And it's just exposed the system as we would be better off being governed by any of those truckers down there in the center of the square than the politicians we have. And absolutely. And that revelation to more and more people led to the mass resistance we now see. And we're seeing changes even when Quebec is like, okay, we're not going to tax the unvaccinated anymore. Okay, maybe I'll stop the curfew. That shows how effective these truckers have been.